The gunfire stopped 3 hours ago, but Princess Kayla still heard it echoing in her mind. She stood in the command center of the Imperial flagship, staring at the transmission that changed everything. The war was over. Humanity had won. More specifically, one human had won it for them. The holographic display showed a soldier's face, dirt-streaked and exhausted, as he accepted the formal surrender from her father's generals. The human military was calling him a hero. They were calling him the man who ended a 30-year conflict with a single impossible mission. Kayla leaned closer to the screen, her three-fingered hands trembling against the console. She knew that face, even covered in blood and grime, even aged by years she hadn't seen. She knew those eyes. Danny Carter, the boy from the neutral station. The human child who had shared her hiding spot in the ventilation shafts when both their parents attended the failed peace conferences 2 decades ago. Her closest friend during those brief, precious months before politics and species drove them apart. Now he was the soldier who had infiltrated the Imperial core, disabled their quantum communications network, and left her people's military blind and helpless. He was the reason her father had no choice but to surrender. He was the reason thousands of her people would live instead of dying in a final desperate battle. And he had no idea who she was. The war began when Kayla was 6 years old. She remembered the explosions, the panic, her mother's arms around her as they fled their home world. She remembered her father's face hardening, becoming something cold and distant. But before that, there had been Danny. They met at the Peace Summit on Station Meridian. While diplomats argued, 2 children found each other in the forgotten spaces of the station. Danny taught her human games. She taught him her language. They built forts from cargo containers and pretended they were explorers discovering new worlds together. He gave her a bracelet made from wire and spare parts. She still had it, hidden in a locked box in her quarters. When the summit collapsed and war became inevitable, their parents grabbed them both. She remembered Danny crying, reaching for her as his father pulled him toward the human ships. She remembered screaming his name until her voice broke. Then the war swallowed everything. Kayla grew up in military compounds and fortified stations. She learned strategy, diplomacy, and how to carry the weight of her people's suffering. Danny, she assumed, had forgotten her. Just another childhood memory lost to time and violence. But now, watching him stand before her father's generals with quiet dignity, she wondered if he ever thought about those days. If he remembered the girl who showed him how to read star charts, who laughed at his terrible pronunciation of her language, who cried when they were separated. Her communications officer approached carefully. Commander Vex was old enough to remember the early days when some still hoped for peace. He knew about the summit. He might even remember seeing her with a human child, though he had never mentioned it. The commander's voice was gentle. Humans were demanding a face-to-face negotiation. They wanted someone from the Imperial family to meet with their hero, to formalize the surrender with proper ceremony. They wanted her. Kayla's heart pounded in the way only extreme fear or anticipation could cause. She would see Danny again, after 20 years, after a war that killed millions, after he became the soldier who defeated her people. She didn't know if she wanted to embrace him or strike him. She didn't know if he would even recognize her. The aliens had surrendered, but the hardest battle was just beginning, not between species, but between 2 people who once meant everything to each other and now stood on opposite sides of history. Kayla straightened her uniform and nodded to Commander Vex. She would meet the human hero. She would face Danny Carter. And somehow she would find the right words to say to the boy who ended her world twice. The transport shuttle descended through Earth's atmosphere with Kayla gripping the armrests hard enough to leave marks. She had never been to the human home world before. During the war, it had been the ultimate target, the symbolic heart they could never quite reach. Now she was landing there as a defeated princess, coming to sign documents that would reshape her entire civilization. Commander Vex sat across from her, his expression carefully neutral. The 6 royal guards positioned throughout the shuttle were less successful at hiding their resentment. They were warriors who had lost their war, escorting their princess to meet the enemy who had beaten them. The ceremony was taking place in Geneva, in one of the ancient human cities that had somehow survived the war. Kayla had studied human culture during her education, but reading about it and experiencing it were different things. The city sprawled below them, a mixture of old architecture and new defensive structures. Scars from orbital strikes marked the landscape, reminders that humanity had suffered too. The shuttle landed on a secured platform surrounded by human military. Kayla recognized their uniforms from intelligence briefings. Marines, Special Forces, naval officers. They stood at attention as she emerged, their faces hard but not hostile, professional. She could respect that. A human woman in a formal military dress uniform approached. Her name badge read Colonel Patricia Hayes. She saluted crisply, and Kayla returned the gesture in the human style. Small courtesies mattered now. Everything mattered now. The colonel's voice was firm but not unkind. The ceremony would begin in 2 hours. Until then, Kayla would be given quarters to rest and prepare. The human hero would be there. He was being briefed on proper diplomatic protocols. The government wanted this to go smoothly. Kayla followed the colonel through corridors that reminded her painfully of Station Meridian. The same efficient design, the same recycled air smell. Memories of chasing Danny through similar hallways threatened to overwhelm her. She pushed them down. Her quarters were surprisingly comfortable. Neutral decoration, nothing that would offend alien sensibilities. A window overlooked the city, and Kayla stood there for a long time, watching humans go about their lives. Children playing in a park, workers rebuilding damaged structures. Life continuing despite everything. She opened her communication pad and accessed the files her intelligence officers had compiled on Danny Carter. The reading made her chest ache. He had grown up in military schools after the war started. His father had died in one of the early battles. His mother worked in a factory producing weapons. Danny had enlisted at 18, younger than human military regulations typically allowed, but they made exceptions during wartime. He had been good at it. Too good. Special operations, deep infiltration, high-risk missions. He had spent 15 years becoming the perfect weapon. The mission that ended the war had been considered suicide. 73 soldiers had volunteered. Danny had been chosen because his psychological profile showed he would complete the objective even if it meant certain death. He had infiltrated the Imperial Core by hiding in a captured supply ship for 3 weeks. He had navigated the station alone, avoiding thousands of guards, planting quantum disruptors in locations so precise that their simultaneous activation would cascade through the entire network. When discovered, he had held his position long enough to trigger the devices manually, even as guards fired on him. He had survived barely and spent 2 months in a medical facility recovering from injuries that should have killed him. The reports called him a hero. Kayla called him a product of the same war that had shaped her. A knock on her door interrupted her reading. Commander Vex entered without waiting for permission, something he only did when matters were serious. His expression was troubled. He had information she needed to hear. The human military was not unified in celebrating their victory. Some factions believed the surrender had come too easily, that humanity should press their advantage and demand harsher terms. There were politicians calling for occupation, for restrictions that would cripple her people for generations. The ceremony today mattered because it would set the tone. If Kayla and Danny could show unity, could demonstrate that peace was possible, it would strengthen the moderates. If the meeting went poorly, the Hawks would have ammunition. No pressure then. Just the future of 2 species resting on her ability to face her childhood friend without falling apart. Vex left her to prepare. Kayla changed into her formal diplomatic attire, a flowing robe that marked her rank and heritage. She placed her mother's medallion around her neck, a reminder of why this mattered. In the mirror, she looked like a princess. She felt like a terrified child. The ceremony hall was enormous, designed to host important human gatherings. Rows of seats filled with dignitaries, press, military officials, cameras everywhere. This would be broadcast across both human space and what remained of her empire. The weight of all those watching eyes pressed down on her. She walked to her designated position on the stage, flanked by Commander Vex and her guards. Across from her stood empty seats where the human delegation would sit. Behind them, a massive screen displayed both species' emblems side by side, a statement of unity they had not yet earned. Music played, something classical and human. The audience rose. Kayla forced herself to breathe steadily as the human delegation entered. Military officers, government officials, and at the center of them all, wearing a dress uniform with more medals than seemed possible, Danny Carter. He walked with quiet confidence, acknowledging no one, his eyes fixed straight ahead. He looked so different from the boy she remembered. Taller, broader, with scars visible on his neck and hands. His hair was cut military short, his face had lost its softness, replaced by hard angles and a jaw that looked like it had been broken and healed imperfectly. But his eyes were the same, brown and deep and carrying a sadness that resonated with her own. He took his position directly across from her. Their eyes met. For one heartbeat, two, three, Kayla searched his face for any sign of recognition. Nothing. He looked at her with professional courtesy, nothing more. He had no idea who she was. The human official began speaking formal words about sacrifice and victory and the hope for lasting peace. Kayla heard none of it. She kept staring at Danny, willing him to remember. Remember the ventilation shafts. Remember the star charts. Remember the bracelet. Remember me. But he stood perfectly still, the ideal soldier, present for duty and nothing more. When it came time for her to speak, Kayla almost broke protocol. She almost said his name, the way she used to say it. Danny, come look at this. Danny, I found a shortcut. Danny, don't leave me. Instead, she delivered her prepared remarks about honor and peace and building a better future. Her voice only shook once, and she covered it by pausing to drink water. The ceremony continued with the signing of preliminary agreements. She and Danny sat at a table, documents between them. They signed. They stood. They were supposed to shake hands for the cameras. When Danny extended his hand, Kayla took it. His skin was warm and calloused. The touch sent electricity through her. She held on perhaps a moment too long, searching his face one more time. Still nothing. He smiled politely, the smile of a soldier doing his duty. She released his hand and stepped back. The ceremony concluded. People applauded. Kayla barely heard it over the rushing in her ears. She had been so certain that seeing each other would trigger something, some recognition, some connection to what they had been. But Danny looked at her like she was a stranger. Maybe that was all she was now. The reception after the ceremony was torture. Kayla stood in a corner of the grand hall accepting congratulations and making small talk with dignitaries while her mind remained fixed on Danny across the room. He was surrounded by admirers, humans thanking him, shaking his hand, taking photographs. He handled it with the same professional distance he had shown during the ceremony. She noticed he never smiled with his eyes. Commander Vex brought her a drink, something human and alcoholic. She sipped it carefully, grateful for something to do with her hands. The commander spoke quietly, reminding her that several key politicians wanted to meet her, that these conversations mattered for the peace process. Kayla nodded and forced herself to focus. She spoke with a human senator about trade agreements. She discussed reconstruction efforts with a general whose son had died fighting her people. She accepted condolences from a diplomat whose mother had been killed in a raid Danny himself had led. Every conversation was a careful dance, and she was exhausted. Hours passed. The crowd thinned. Danny remained, now speaking with a small group of military officers. Kayla decided she had done enough diplomatic work. She needed air, space, a moment to process everything. She slipped away from Commander Vex and found a balcony overlooking the city. The night air was cool and carried unfamiliar scents. Earth smelled different from every station or planet she had known. She leaned against the railing and finally allowed herself to feel the disappointment crushing her chest. She had been foolish to hope. 20 years was a lifetime. Danny had been a child when they met. The war had changed him into someone else entirely. Why should he remember one alien girl from a brief, peaceful moment? She was nobody to him, just the enemy princess he had defeated. A voice behind her, quiet and careful, spoke her name. Not her title, not princess. Her name. Kayla. She spun around. Danny stood in the balcony doorway, alone, his expression no longer blank. He looked uncertain, almost afraid. He took a step closer and his voice cracked when he spoke again. He asked if she remembered Station Meridian, the ventilation shafts behind the cargo bay, the game where they pretended to be explorers. The last day when the alarm sounded and they were pulled apart, Kayla's vision blurred. She nodded, unable to speak. Danny's hands were shaking. He said he recognized her the moment she walked into the ceremony hall. The way she moved, the tilt of her head, something in her eyes. But he hadn't been sure. 20 years was a long time. Aliens changed as they matured in ways humans didn't always understand. He had spent the entire ceremony trying to convince himself he was wrong, that it was impossible, that his childhood friend could not possibly be the princess he had helped defeat. But when she held his hand, when she looked at him with such intensity, he knew it was her, his Kayla. Kayla crossed the distance between them in 3 steps. She wanted to hug him like she had when they were children, but they were not children anymore. They were representatives of 2 species that had spent decades trying to kill each other. Danny was the one who closed the final gap. He wrapped his arms around her and Kayla buried her face against his shoulder and cried. Years of grief and loss and loneliness poured out of her. Danny held her tightly, his own tears soaking into her hair. They stood like that for a long time, 2 broken people finding a piece of their past in each other. When they finally pulled apart, Danny apologized. For the war, for the mission, for being the one who defeated her people. Kayla shook her head. She told him there was nothing to forgive. He had done what he thought was right. He had ended the war. He had saved lives, human and alien alike. The alternative would have been total destruction. Danny's expression was anguished. He said he had thought about her every day of the war. She had been his reminder that aliens were people, not just enemies. When he was on his mission, when he was planting those disruptors, he had thought about her and hoped she was safe. He had prayed that ending the war would somehow protect her. Kayla asked why he had not tried to find her, to contact her. Danny laughed bitterly. He said he had tried. For years, he searched through intelligence reports, diplomatic databases, any information about the imperial family. But her name never appeared. Security protocols kept royal children anonymous. He had no idea the girl he loved was a princess until today. The word hung in the air between them. Loved. Past tense, but still there. Danny looked horrified, like he had revealed too much. He started to apologize, to take it back. Kayla stopped him by taking his hand. She told him about the bracelet still locked in her quarters on the flagship. She told him about the night she spent looking at old photographs from the summit, searching for his face in the background. She told him that he had been her reason to hope that peace was possible, that humans and her people could coexist. She told him that she loved him too, past tense and present tense and probably future tense as well. Danny looked at her like she was something precious and impossible. He said this was insane. She was a princess. He was a soldier. Their people had just ended a war. There would be scandal, outrage, political consequences. Kayla smiled for the first time in hours. She said she didn't care. She had spent 20 years being what everyone else needed her to be. The dutiful daughter, the symbol of her people, the diplomatic princess. For once, she wanted to choose something for herself. And she chose him. Danny's responding smile transformed his face. For a moment, she saw the boy she remembered, bright and happy and full of life. He said she was going to cause an intergalactic incident. Kayla laughed and said, "Good. The galaxy could use some chaos." They stayed on that balcony talking until dawn colored the sky. They caught each other up on 20 years of life, filling in the gaps with stories both tragic and mundane. Danny told her about his mother who had remarried and found happiness despite the war. Kayla told him about her younger brother, who was being groomed to take over leadership. They talked about the friends they had lost, the innocents the war had stolen, the people they had become. As the sun rose, Danny admitted he had no idea what happened next. His military career was effectively over. He was too famous, too recognizable. The government wanted to retire him with honors and use him for propaganda. The thought made him sick. Kayla had an idea forming. She asked if he had ever considered diplomatic work, building bridges between species, teaching others what they had learned as children, that humans and her people could be friends. Danny raised an eyebrow. She was offering him a job. Kayla shrugged. She was offering him a purpose, and maybe, if he was interested, a chance to stay close to her. Danny's answer was to kiss her. It was gentle and careful, a question more than a statement. Kayla kissed him back, her answer clear. Behind them, someone cleared their throat. Commander Vex stood in the doorway, his expression carefully neutral. He informed them that the diplomatic delegation was looking for the princess. Also, several news drones had captured their embrace, and the images were already spreading across human networks. The interstellar scandal was beginning. Kayla looked at Danny, Danny looked at her. They both started laughing, the kind of helpless laughter that comes from absurdity and joy mixed together. Let the galaxy talk. They had found each other again. Everything else could wait. The scandal was worse than either of them anticipated. By noon, every major news network in human space was running stories about the princess and the war hero. Speculation ranged from romantic to conspiratorial. Some called it a beautiful symbol of peace. Others called it a betrayal. The alien networks were equally divided, with many of Kayla's people viewing her connection to Danny as either evidence she had been compromised or proof that unity was possible. Kayla sat in a conference room with her advisors, listening to them outline the political damage. Her father was furious. The Imperial Council was demanding her immediate return. Human politicians who supported harsher peace terms were using the situation as evidence that the royal family could not be trusted. The moderates were scrambling to control the narrative. Commander Vex was the only one who seemed amused by the chaos. He pointed out that every media outlet was now talking about peace, about the possibility of cooperation between species. The conversation had shifted from punishment to reconciliation. Sometimes, he suggested, scandal served a purpose. A knock interrupted the meeting. A human military aide entered and informed them that Sergeant Carter was requesting an audience with the princess. Kayla dismissed her advisors despite their protests and asked for Danny to be brought in. He entered wearing casual clothes instead of his uniform, looking more like the boy she remembered. He carried a small bag and seemed nervous. Danny sat across from her and said they needed to talk about the reality of their situation. He had spent the morning with his own advisors, being lectured about protocol and consequences. His commanding officers had made it clear that any relationship with her would end his military career and possibly expose him to charges of improper conduct with a foreign dignitary. Kayla told him her father had threatened to disown her. Her advisors were suggesting she make a public statement denying any romantic involvement, claiming they were simply old friends reconnecting. The smart thing, the safe thing, was to end this before it destroyed both their futures. Danny nodded slowly. Then he asked what she wanted to do. Not what she should do, but what she wanted. Kayla looked at him. Really looked at him. This man who had been her first friend, who had become a soldier, who had ended a war to protect people like her. This man who had spent 20 years remembering her. This man who made her feel like herself instead of a symbol. She wanted him, all of him, whatever the cost. Danny reached into his bag and pulled out something wrapped in cloth. He unwrapped it carefully, revealing a bracelet made from wire and spare parts, worn and tarnished, but intact. Kayla gasped. He had kept it. Danny explained that when they were separated at the summit, he had grabbed her bracelet from the floor where it had fallen. He had carried it through every mission, every battle. It was his reminder of who he was before the war, of the person he wanted to be again. He held it out to her. Kayla took it with trembling hands. The metal was warm from being close to his body. She fastened it around her wrist where it had been meant to go 20 years ago. Then she removed her mother's medallion from her neck and placed it around his. If they were going to do this, to choose each other despite the consequences, they would do it right. The medallion was a symbol of her house, of her authority as a princess. Giving it to Danny was a declaration that she chose him above duty, above politics, above everything. Danny understood the significance. He asked if she was sure. Kayla said she had never been more sure of anything. The next weeks were chaotic. Kayla's father demanded she return to the Imperial flagship. She refused. The human government requested that Danny resign from military service to avoid conflicts of interest. He agreed. Together, they drafted a joint statement explaining their childhood friendship and their belief that personal connections between species were essential for lasting peace. The response was mixed. Some people embraced their story as evidence that reconciliation was possible. Others condemned them as naive, selfish, or worse. Death threats came from extremists on both sides. Security protocols became suffocating. Through it all, they stayed together. Danny moved into the secure facility where Kayla was housed. They spent their days in meetings with diplomats and their evenings talking, learning each other all over again. Slowly, something unexpected happened. Their relationship became a rallying point for people who wanted peace. Soldiers who had fought each other began sharing their own stories of enemies they had respected or moments of unexpected humanity in the midst of war. Civilians started organizing cultural exchange programs. Artists created works celebrating unity. The narrative was shifting. 3 months after the initial ceremony, Kayla's father requested a private meeting. She traveled to the flagship with Danny at her side, both of them prepared for confrontation. Her father was older than she remembered, worn down by years of war and the weight of defeat. He looked at Danny with undisguised hostility, then at his daughter with something softer, regret, maybe? He asked Danny what his intentions were. The question was almost absurd in its formality, but Danny answered seriously. He intended to spend his life supporting Kayla and working toward peace between their species. He intended to honor her and her people. He intended to prove that love could bridge even the widest divides. Kayla's father was quiet for a long time. Then he asked Kayla if this human made her happy. She said yes. More than that, Danny made her hopeful. He represented the possibility of a future where the war was truly over, where children of both species could grow up as friends instead of enemies. Her father sighed. He said he had fought for 30 years to protect his people. He had made terrible decisions, sacrificed countless lives, all in the name of survival. Now his daughter was telling him that peace might be found in the most unlikely place, in the connection between two children who had refused to be enemies. He gave them his blessing, not enthusiastically, but genuinely. He could not fight anymore. If his daughter believed in this path, he would support her. The formal political implications would be complicated, but he would work with his council to accept Danny as Kayla's chosen partner. The relief was overwhelming. Kayla embraced her father for the first time in years. He held her stiffly, unused to affection, but he held her. Danny stood awkwardly to the side until her father invited him to join. The three of them stood together, an impossible tableau that would have been unthinkable months ago. As they left the flagship, Danny asked Kayla if she realized what they had just accomplished. She was the first member of the Imperial family to formally partner with a human. This would change everything. Kayla smiled and took his hand. She said that was exactly the point. They had been given a second chance that millions of people would never have. The least they could do was make it matter. 6 months after the war ended, Kayla and Danny stood before a mixed audience of humans and aliens. They were announcing the formation of a new organization dedicated to post-war reconciliation and cultural exchange. Kayla would serve as director. Danny would lead field operations. Their mission was to prevent future conflicts by building the kind of connections they had found as children. The speech Kayla gave was not diplomatic or careful. She spoke about loss and hope, about the children who would never grow up because of the war, about the responsibility they all shared to make sure it never happened again. She spoke about finding her oldest friend on opposite sides of a conflict and choosing to believe that their bond mattered more than history. Danny added that soldiers on both sides had told him the same thing in the months since the war ended. They were tired of fighting, they wanted to build instead of destroy. They needed leaders willing to try something new. The organization would start small: cultural exchanges, educational programs, joint reconstruction projects, but it would grow. And maybe, eventually, species who had been enemies could become partners. The audience response was enthusiastic, not universal, but strong enough to matter. As they left the stage, Kayla heard someone in the crowd say that maybe the princess and the soldier could actually pull this off. Danny squeezed her hand. He said they had to try. They owed it to the children they had been and to all the children who deserved a better future. Kayla agreed. Their story had started in the hidden spaces of a diplomatic station. Two kids who refused to see each other as enemies. Now they would spend their lives making sure other children had the same chance. The war had tried to break them. Instead, it had shown them what they were fighting for: each other, peace, hope, a future worth building. And they were just getting started. 1 year after the war ended, Kayla stood in the reconstructed community center on Station Meridian and felt like she had come home. The station had been badly damaged during the conflict, but the new administration had prioritized its repair as a symbol of renewed cooperation. Now it hosted the headquarters of the Reconciliation Initiative, the organization she and Danny had built from nothing. The center was full of people. Human children learning alien languages from volunteer teachers, alien adolescents working alongside human engineers on repair projects, veterans from both sides sharing meals and stories. It was chaotic and noisy and exactly what they had envisioned. Danny found her watching from the observation deck. He wrapped an arm around her waist and pulled her close. After a year together, the gesture was comfortable and familiar. He smelled like machine oil and coffee, evidence of his morning spent teaching maintenance skills to a mixed group of trainees. Kayla leaned into him and pointed out a particular group in the courtyard below. A human girl and an alien boy, both around 7 years old, were building something from scrap materials. They were laughing, communicating in a mix of both languages, completely oblivious to the species difference that had meant so much to the previous generation. Danny smiled and said that was why they did this work. Those kids would grow up knowing each other as friends. When they were adults, they would remember playing together on Station Meridian. They would be less likely to see each other as enemies if conflict ever threatened again. Commander Vex approached with a datapad. He had officially retired from military service to join their organization, claiming he was too old to start another war but young enough to help build a peace. His role was logistics and security, which he performed with the same efficiency he had brought to military operations. The commander informed them that they had received approval for the next phase of their program. 20 mixed teams, human and alien, working together would deploy to war-damaged worlds to assist with reconstruction. It was ambitious and risky. There would be cultural clashes, misunderstandings, possibly violence from extremists who opposed cooperation, but it was necessary. Kayla authorized the mission. Danny added that he would personally lead the first team. She started to protest, worried about the danger, but he cut her off gently. He reminded her that he was a soldier. He knew the risks. More importantly, people needed to see leaders willing to do the hard work themselves, not just direct others into danger. Kayla wanted to argue but knew he was right. They had built this organization on the principle that reconciliation required sacrifice and courage. Danny volunteering to lead the most dangerous missions was consistent with that vision. She just wished it didn't terrify her every time he left. That evening, they walked through the station's restored corridors, retracing the paths they had taken as children. Kayla showed Danny the ventilation shaft where they used to hide, now sealed for safety regulations. Danny found the cargo bay where they had built their fortress from shipping containers. So much had changed, but the bones of their friendship remained. They ended up in the observation dome where they used to watch ships arrive and depart. The view was different now, with more traffic and new security protocols, but the stars were the same. Kayla remembered sitting here with Danny, both of them dreaming about exploring the galaxy together. Danny must have been thinking the same thing. He said they had done it, in a way. They were exploring a new reality, one where humans and aliens worked together. It wasn't the adventure they had imagined as children, but it mattered more. Kayla agreed, then added that she had something to tell him. She was pregnant. The words hung in the air. Danny turned to stare at her, his expression cycling through shock, joy, and terror in rapid succession. He asked if she was sure. Kayla laughed and confirmed that yes, she was sure. Human-alien hybrid pregnancies were rare but possible. The medical team had been monitoring her closely. Everything looked healthy. Danny sat down abruptly, overwhelmed. A child, their child, the first human-alien hybrid born from the reconciliation efforts. The political implications would be enormous. Kayla sat beside him and took his hand. She said she knew it was complicated. Their child would face challenges neither of them could fully anticipate. But she also believed their child could be a symbol of hope, living proof that their species could build a future together. Danny pulled her close and whispered that he was terrified. He didn't know how to be a father. He had spent his entire adult life as a soldier. What if he failed their child the way the previous generation had failed them? Kayla told him that acknowledging fear was the first step toward being a good parent. They would figure it out together, making mistakes and learning just like everyone else. The difference was their child would grow up knowing that love could cross any boundary. Over the next months, the pregnancy became public knowledge. The response was predictable. Some celebrated it as the ultimate symbol of unity. Others condemned it as an abomination. There were protests and threats. Security around Kayla intensified to the point where she felt suffocated. Danny refused to leave her side, even canceling his mission to stay close. Kayla tried to argue that the work was more important than worrying over her, but Danny was immovable. His family came first. Always. The medical challenges were significant. Human and alien biology were compatible, but not identical. The doctors were learning as they went, consulting with specialists from both species. There were complications and scary moments when they thought they might lose the baby. Each crisis brought them closer together. Danny holding Kayla's hand through every procedure, Kayla drawing strength from his steady presence. Commander Vex became an unexpected source of support. He had grandchildren somewhere in Imperial space, and he shared wisdom about parenting that surprised both of them. He also increased security protocols without being asked, anticipating threats before they materialized. His protectiveness made Kayla appreciate him even more. 7 months into the pregnancy, an extremist group attempted to attack the medical facility where Kayla was staying. The assault was well-planned and nearly succeeded. Danny was out meeting with donors when the alarm sounded. He rushed back to find the facility in lockdown, armed guards exchanging fire with attackers in the corridors. Commander Vex had already moved Kayla to a secure room deep in the facility. She was unharmed, but shaken. Danny found them there, Vex standing guard with a weapon while Kayla tried to stay calm. The sight of Danny made her burst into tears. He held her while security forces neutralized the threat. When it was over, 17 people were dead, including 3 guards who had died protecting her. The attackers were a mix of human and alien extremists, united by their opposition to everything Kayla and Danny represented. The incident made headlines across all networks. Instead of destroying support for their cause, it galvanized it. People who had been neutral or quietly opposed saw the violence and recoiled. Donations to the Reconciliation Initiative increased. Volunteers flooded their offices. The attempted murder of a pregnant princess and her unborn child had finally made the cost of continued hatred clear. Danny wanted to move Kayla somewhere safer, but she refused. She would not hide. Their child would not be born in fear. Instead, they increased security and continued their work. 2 months later, Kayla went into labor. The delivery was complicated, requiring a medical team of specialists from both species working together. Danny stayed with her throughout, holding her hand, whispering encouragement, looking more terrified than she had ever seen him. After 16 hours, their daughter was born. She was tiny and perfect with features that blended both their species in ways that were beautiful and strange. Her skin had a slight blue tint from Kayla's genetics, but smooth like Danny's. She had 4 fingers like Kayla's people, but with human-like joints. Her eyes were large and dark, impossible to categorize as either human or alien. They named her Maya, a name that existed in both human and alien cultures. It meant hope. When Commander Vex first saw the baby, the old warrior cried. He said Maya was what they had all been fighting for, a future where species differences didn't matter. Danny looked at his daughter and promised her that she would grow up in a better world. He and Kayla would make sure of it. The galaxy could rage and fight, but this small life would be protected and cherished. Kayla added that Maya would know both her heritages. She would be raised to understand human and alien cultures, to speak both languages, to see herself as a bridge instead of a hybrid. She would never have to choose between her parent species. She could be both. The first weeks were exhausting. Maya required constant care, and neither Danny nor Kayla had any real experience with infants. They fumbled through feedings and diaper changes and sleepless nights. Commander Vex helped more than expected, apparently having retained parenting skills from decades ago. Slowly, they found a rhythm. Danny would walk Maya around the apartment at night singing human lullabies. Kayla would tell her stories from alien mythology. They took turns with everything, determined to share the burden and joy equally. As Maya grew, she became the center of their world. The Reconciliation Initiative continued operating, with Commander Vex taking on more leadership so Kayla and Danny could focus on their daughter. They still attended important meetings and functions, but Maya always came first. When Maya smiled for the first time, reaching for both parents with her small hands, Kayla felt something shift in her chest. This was what they had fought for. Not abstract peace or political agreements, but this specific moment, this child who existed because they had refused to let war define them. Danny must have felt the same thing. He looked at Kayla over their daughter's head and said they had done something impossible. They had taken the worst thing in the galaxy, a decades-long war, and found something beautiful in its aftermath. Kayla disagreed gently. They hadn't created beauty from the war. They had preserved something beautiful that the war had tried to destroy. Their friendship, their love, their hope. Those things had existed before the conflict and survived it. Maya was proof that some things were stronger than violence. 6 months after Maya's birth, Kayla and Danny were invited to address the Joint Council overseeing post-war agreements. They brought Maya with them, refusing to leave her behind. She slept peacefully in Kayla's arms as they spoke about the progress of reconciliation efforts. Danny presented data showing reduced tensions in areas where their programs operated. Kayla shared testimonials from participants describing changed perspectives and new friendships. Then Kayla held up her daughter for everyone to see. She said Maya represented the future they were building. Not human, not alien, but something new. A generation that would grow up without the hatred that had poisoned their parents. The council was silent. Then, slowly, first one representative and then another began to applaud. Soon the entire chamber was standing, human and alien together, applauding for a sleeping baby who had no idea she was making history. After the session, an elderly human diplomat approached them. She said she had lost 2 sons in the war. She had hated aliens with every fiber of her being. But seeing Maya, seeing the love between Kayla and Danny, something in her had broken open. She asked if she could hold the baby. Kayla handed Maya over carefully. The diplomat cradled her gently, tears streaming down her face. She whispered that maybe her sons' deaths had not been meaningless if they led to this future. Danny told her that her sons would be remembered as heroes who fought so people like Maya could exist. Kayla added that the best way to honor them was to make sure no more children died in wars between their species. The diplomat handed Maya back and thanked them. She walked away looking lighter somehow, as if a burden had been lifted. Danny and Kayla exchanged glances. These were the moments that mattered. Not the grand speeches or political agreements, but the individual hearts changed. The grief transformed into hope. That night, after putting Maya to sleep, Kayla and Danny sat together and talked about the future. Their daughter would grow up in a complicated world, facing challenges they couldn't fully predict, but she would also have opportunities they never had. She would be free in ways they had only dreamed of. Danny said he wished his father could have met Maya. Kayla wished her mother had survived to see this. They both carried the weight of absent family, people who had been lost to the war, but they also had each other and their daughter and a community that supported them. It was enough. More than enough. It was everything. Kayla leaned against Danny and felt his heartbeat, steady and strong. The boy she had loved as a child had become the man she loved as an adult. The war had tried to destroy that love, had put them on opposite sides, had made them enemies. But love had survived, and from that survival, a new future was being born. In the next room, Maya stirred in her sleep and made a soft sound. Both parents rose immediately, moving together to check on her. She settled back into sleep on her own, content and safe. They stood watching her breathe, this impossible child of an impossible love. Danny whispered that they had won, not the war, but something more important. They had won the peace. They had won the future, and they had won it together.